On May 28, 1973, a young woman named Christine Millett stopped by a small kiosk at a campsite in South Australia to buy a cup of coffee. As she chatted with the site's caretaker, she mentioned the plan for the day. She and her group were heading out to a nearby sinkhole known as the Shaft. Their goal was to dive all the way down to the lowest depths of the submerged cavern. The caretaker, clearly concerned, warned her that it was a risky adventure. But Christine assured him they'd be fine. Everyone in her group, she said, was a seasoned diving instructor. They knew exactly what they were doing. But just hours later, Christine Millett and 3 others from her team would lose their lives in a tragic accident, one that would become a defining moment in the history of cave diving. The sinkhole they were diving into, which would eventually become known as the Shaft, was first discovered back in 1938. A dairy farmer's horse had nearly fallen while crossing a paddock in South Australia. When the farmer went to investigate, he realized the animal had tripped over a deep, narrow hole in the earth. Peering down, he saw water glinting far below. At first, the family that owned the land tried to seal off the hole by dumping in rocks and sand, but after hauling in thousands of tons of fill with no effect, they gave up. It became clear that a massive underground lake stretched out beneath their property. By the 1960s, that hidden lake had caught the attention of thrill-seeking cave divers. The landowners eventually opened the site to visitors, and it quickly became one of the most sought-after diving spots in Australia. The main chamber alone was the size of a football field, with an 18-foot, 5.5-meter drop from ground level to the water's surface. One of the first things divers would notice was the cone-shaped pile of debris, a leftover from the family's failed effort to plug the hole. Divers call this formation the rock pile. The second notable feature of the main chamber appears around midday, when sunlight streams directly through the opening above. A brilliant, narrow beam of light cuts down into the cavern, shining straight through the crystal-clear water below. This dramatic visual is what gave the cave its name, the Shaft. Branching out from the main chamber are 2 submerged tunnels. One stretches northwest, reaching a depth of about 80 meters or 260 feet. The other extends eastward and descends even deeper, down to 124 meters or roughly 407 feet. The full extent of these tunnels remains unknown, as they quickly become too tight and cluttered to pass through safely. On May 26, 1973, a group of 9 divers arrived in Mount Gambier, planning an expedition into the Shaft. Among them were 3 siblings, 19-year-old Christine Millett, 25-year-old Glenn Millett, and 22-year-old Stephen Millett. Joining them were 20-year-old John Bachman, 27-year-old Peter Burr, 24-year-old Larry Reynolds, 28-year-old Gordon Roberts, 26-year-old Robert Smith, and Joan Harper, who was around Rewritten. Most of the team were connected through the South Pacific Diving Group based in New South Wales. Every member had solid experience underwater, and many were certified scuba instructors. However, while they were all seasoned divers, few had any background in cave diving. In fact, for most of them, this would be their first time diving in a cave or sinkhole. The one exception was Robert Smith, who had already explored the Shaft on 8 separate occasions. The group set up camp at Queen Elizabeth Caravan Park nearby and made their way to the site the following day. After a short conversation with one of the landowners, they signed the guest book at the farmhouse and hauled their gear out to the entrance of the Shaft. On their first dive, which took place on May 27th, the group used a pulley system to lower themselves through the narrow entrance into the cave. Once inside, they set up a weighted guideline in the water. This shot line would serve as a reference to help them safely descend and return to the surface. They followed it down to the rock pile and spent several hours exploring around its base. The water was exceptionally clear, and the group took their time examining the fallen rubble, searching for animal bones or anything else of interest scattered among the rocks. After surfacing, they headed back to their campsite, leaving the guideline in place for their planned return the following day. When May 28th came around, the team grabbed coffee at the campsite. It was during this time that Christine Millett briefly chatted with the caretaker and mentioned their diving plans. They also made a stop at a nearby sporting goods store to refill their air tanks. Once they were fully stocked and ready, they drove back out to the Shaft to begin their second dive. This time, only 8 divers entered the water. Joan Harper had decided to sit this dive out. Instead, She stayed near the cave entrance, preparing soup to have ready when the others returned. The rest of the group descended again to the rock pile at the base. Not long after they reached it, Robert Smith began to feel unwell. From experience, he recognized the signs. He was suffering from nitrogen narcosis. This condition can affect divers when they go deep underwater and breathe compressed gas under high pressure. It causes the nervous system to misfire, leading to confusion, poor judgment, and other impairments. The deeper a diver goes, the more intense those symptoms usually become. The symptoms of nitrogen narcosis can include dizziness, disorientation, tunnel vision, anxiety, trembling, and, most critically, impaired judgment. Divers often compare its effects to feeling drunk. As Robert Smith began to experience these warning signs, he signaled to the others that he was heading back to the top of the rock pile. The rest of the team continued their descent. Roughly 10 minutes later, most of the group had made their way toward the start of the northwest tunnel, right at the edge of the rock pile. Their oxygen was running low. Larry Reynolds and Peter Burr decided it was time to turn back. They ascended and reached the surface, where they found Robert Smith already out of the water. All three were nearly out of air and quickly realized the others must be in the same situation, if not worse. They swapped out their empty tanks for full ones and made multiple attempts to dive back down and search for their teammates. But by then, a thick cloud of silt had been stirred up from the cave floor, turning the water murky and reducing visibility to almost nothing. During their search, they did come across Stephen Millett's flashlight and camera, lying abandoned on the cave floor. But there was no sign of the others. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts had gone deeper into the northwest tunnel. When they finally noticed how low their air had gotten, they attempted to head back. But instead of retracing the gentle incline of the tunnel, they mistakenly swam almost straight upward. Disoriented by the cloudy water and affected by nitrogen narcosis, they surfaced into a rock dome, a hollow chamber at the top of the passage. In the darkness and confusion, they couldn't find the way back out. Trapped and out of air, both Christine and Gordon lost their lives in that pocket of stone. Just a few minutes later, Glenn Millett made the decision to head back. And he had just enough air left to reach the surface safely. During his ascent, he spotted John Bachman. Glenn would have known that John, too, was running dangerously low on air, but instead of turning around, John was swimming with purpose deeper into the Northwest Passage, moving farther away from the only path that could have saved him. It's likely that John was experiencing the effects of nitrogen narcosis by then, his judgment impaired and his sense of direction scrambled. Glenn couldn't help him. He continued upward, while John, out of air, drowned deep within the passage. Stephen Millett was never seen again by the survivors. Later investigation would show that at some point before he died, Stephen had activated the buoyancy vest he was wearing, possibly in a desperate effort to reach the surface quickly. Or perhaps he understood he wouldn't survive and wanted to make sure his body could rise to where it might eventually be found. Back at the surface, Joan Harper, who had remained near the cave entrance throughout the dive, rushed to the nearby farmhouse to get help. The police responded to the call, but by the time they arrived, it was painfully clear there was no hope left for those still underwater. From that point forward, the focus shifted to body recovery. Initial efforts by police divers to retrieve the bodies were unsuccessful. The site was simply too difficult to navigate without specialized training, and so the search was suspended with plans to return once more advanced cave diving expertise could be brought in. Nearly a year later, a recovery operation was carried out by a joint team of police divers, skilled recreational cave divers, and a crew of underwater filmmakers. When the bodies were finally located and removed, decomposition was so advanced that identification had to be done through dental records. As the recovery effort took place, an official investigation was also underway to determine what had gone wrong and how such an experienced group of divers could have lost their lives in a single dive. Some of the surviving divers later raised concerns about the air they'd had their tanks refilled with at a sporting goods store in Mount Gambier. They suspected it may have been contaminated and might have played a role in the deaths of their teammates, but after thorough testing, no evidence of contamination was found. Instead, investigators identified several contributing factors. The most significant was the group's limited experience with cave diving. Despite being qualified scuba divers, they had not followed key safety protocols specific to cave environments. For instance, they hadn't used a buddy system, failed to map out a detailed dive plan beforehand, and did not set up a guideline to help them navigate their way back out. Once silt was stirred up from the cave floor, visibility plummeted. Combined with the disorienting effects of nitrogen narcosis, this made it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to find the way to safety when things began to go wrong. On top of that, the group appeared to have simply misjudged how long they'd been underwater. By the time they realized they needed to ascend, their air supplies were already critically low. In the wake of the tragedy, police divers began undergoing more advanced training to better prepare for similar situations in the future. In the aftermath of the incident, the diving community across Australia and beyond was shaken. The accident at the shaft became one of the most well-known cave diving tragedies in the country's history. It triggered widespread conversations about safety protocols, training standards, and the specific risks of diving in underwater caves and sinkholes. As a direct result, both recreational and professional diving organizations began to implement stricter rules around cave diving. Greater emphasis was placed on using guidelines, redundant air supplies, and the buddy system, especially in low-visibility environments. Cave diving certifications were made more rigorous, requiring divers to complete specialized training before being allowed to enter sites like the shaft. Memorials were held for Christine Millett, Stephen Millett, John Bachman, and Gordon Roberts, each remembered not just as divers, but as passionate individuals who had loved the underwater world. Their deaths left a lasting impact on their families, their diving peers, and the broader outdoor adventure community in Australia. Over time, the shaft remained a site of both awe and caution. While still visited by experienced cave divers, it came to symbolize the fine line between adventure and risk, a place where the beauty of nature demands absolute respect, preparation, and humility. The tragedy at the shaft became a pivotal moment for the South Australia Police Diving Unit. It pushed them to expand their training and capabilities, making them far better equipped for future operations involving body and evidence recovery in underwater environments. At the same time, the loss of 4 lives, combined with several other serious incidents that occurred around that period, helped lead to the creation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia. This new organization took on the responsibility of accrediting and overseeing cave diving activities across the country. Following its formation, the shaft and several other high-risk sinkholes were closed to anyone who wasn't formally accredited by the association. Since 1973, the world of diving has seen major advancements. Today's cave divers often carry backup air cylinders, rely on sophisticated navigation tools, and always lay down secure safety lines before venturing into complex underwater passages. One of the most important developments has been the use of alternative gas blends in diving tanks, mixtures designed to reduce the effects of nitrogen narcosis and allow for safer, deeper dives than what compressed air alone would permit. Even with all these improvements, cave diving remains one of the most dangerous forms of underwater exploration. The events at the shaft serve as a lasting reminder of the risks involved and the importance of preparation, caution, and respect for the depths below.